Hi, this is Claude, le Père Garneau. The story I'm going to tell you today took place, just over 2,000 years ago in a land far, far away. There was a small village, and on the outskirts of the village lived an old woman named Martha. Now, some of the people in the village said Martha was a crazy old coot. But the people that really knew her figured she was an angel come down from heaven. Now, Martha lived in a little shack, a rundown shack. In the shack, she had a rickety old bed with a half moth-eaten gray wool blanket, a broken down chair, a patched up table, a little fireplace that she used to heat the shack up and to cook over. In front of her shack, she had, one little window, not with a glass in it, but just an opening with a flower box. Now that flower box had the most beautiful flowers year-round. Bright, bright yellows and purples and blues and pinks and reds, constantly flowering. She had a bit of a veranda out front and a railing around it. And her only luxury was an old rocking chair. Now, Martha was poor as can be, but you'd think she didn't know it. I mean, she'd been living there for Lord knows how long. Nobody seemed to know where she came from. And, she never kept anything for herself. Everything she had went to help others. When a woman in the village had a baby, or if a man got sick and couldn't work, well, Martha'd go into her garden and pick some vegetables, go up into the granary, get some grain and grind it down, and she'd make a soup with the vegetables and a loaf of bread. She had a scrawny old cow that she used to milk, and she would make cheese or a little bit of butter with the milk. And what's funny is that the people that got to eat the food she prepared said it was the most unusual thing. It tasted heavenly. So simple, but so tasty. And it kept you from getting hungry all day. You were never overly full, but you were always satisfied the whole day. She had a couple of sheep, and when she cut the wool off them, she dressed so plainly, an old cotton dress and an apron. But the wool she got from her sheep, she would spin and knit a kind of a sweater and socks for the kids in the village. Now, where they lived was never as cold as here, but in the winter, the days and the evenings got fairly cool. And again, the people she gave the clothes to, they said it was the most unusual thing, because when it was warm, you never got too hot. When it was cold, you never felt cold. And if it rained, you stayed dry. She also had a beehive, and the wax she got from the beehive, she turned into candles. But she didn't keep any of the candles for herself. She'd always give them to the kids in the village so they could take them home and use them to light the house so they could learn how to read and write. She lived such a happy but simple life. Her only luxury was that old rocking chair. And every evening, she'd go sit on the veranda and rock, and she would sing songs and pray and remember things from her youth. Now, one night, she's sitting out there rocking, looking at the millions of stars, and she sees a little light coming in the distance. It was a little firefly. And when she saw it, she was just amazed. How can that be? Such a tiny little creature can chase the darkness away. And she started singing a song from her youth. And you'd swear that little firefly was dancing. After a while, Martha said, "Well, my little friend, I have to go to bed. It's been a long day. I'll see you tomorrow night." And the following night and the night after, the little firefly came by, and Martha would sing her songs and tell her stories, and you'd swear that little firefly was dancing to the music. Now, one night, the little firefly landed on the railing. And the next few nights, same thing. Finally, one night, Martha put her hand out, and the little firefly kind of hesitated, because insects and people don't have that good of a relationship most of the time. But the little firefly landed in her hand, and Martha brought her in like this and looked at her with a mixture of awe and sadness, as if she was remembering a long-lost love. And she said, "It's so unbelievable, such a tiny little thing able to bring so much joy, so much light into the world." She said, "I think I'm going to call you Celeste." And she sang her songs and told her stories, and little Celeste stayed there. And every night after that, Celeste would land in Martha's hand, and Martha would tell her a story. Now, as I mentioned, nobody knew where Martha had come from. It seemed like she'd always been there, but she was getting on in years. And one night, Celeste is in her hand, and Martha's looking at her, and a bit of sadness in her eyes. And she said, "My little friend, soon I'll have to leave this earth behind, and where I'm going, I can't take you with me." You'd almost think the little firefly could understand what was being said, because it looked like her light dimmed a tiny bit. The next morning, a young lad from the village came to knock at her door to see if she could knit him a sweater for the upcoming cold season. And they found her dead in her rickety old bed. They buried her in the cemetery, and on her tombstone they wrote, "Martha, we don't know where you're from, but we know where to find you among the angels in heaven." Sure enough, Martha had gone right to heaven, and she was an angel because of all the good she'd done her whole life. And every night, she would see the little Celeste, the little firefly, coming in and landing on the railing, expecting Martha to come out. But she didn't come out. And every night, little Celeste's light got a little dimmer and a little dimmer. And it was tearing Martha's heart apart, because she kept thinking, if I hadn't befriended that little creature, now she's letting herself die because of our friendship, because of her loneliness. It's so totally unfair. And finally, one night, little Celeste landed on the railing, and her light was gone. So Martha, as angels can do, came down to earth, and she picked up little Celeste and put her in her hand, and she sang a song, and she cried some tears, but it was too late. So she put her hand over like this and went back to heaven, and she kind of edged off into a forgotten corner of heaven, and she would spend her days singing songs to little Celeste, heartbroken over her fate. Well, after a certain amount of time, Celeste came to. And when she saw Martha, she was so happy that she came to with the light of 1,000 suns. It was so bright that the Lord himself came running over to see what was happening. Now, just between you and I, it takes something pretty darn special to make the good Lord run, And when he got there, he saw Martha with little Celeste in her hands, blazing away. And he said, "Martha, Martha, what have you done?" And Martha explained, she said, "Lord, this little creature I befriended, and because I came up here, she was letting herself die. But the Lord said, 'Martha, you know heaven is for souls only, not living creatures. She has to go back.' And Martha said, 'Lord, isn't there something you can do? If we send her back, she'll let herself die again through no fault of her own. I'm the one that befriended her and caused all this loneliness.' Well, the Lord said, 'Let me think about this for a while.' And he went back to his heavenly throne, and he sat there and pondered. Now, in heaven, time doesn't flow the same way as here, so we don't really know how long the Lord pondered. But then he called Martha and Celeste, and he said, 'Martha and Celeste,' he said, 'soon, very soon, I will send mankind a little baby to save them. But,' he said, 'I need the brightest star in the heavens to guide people to find this little baby.' So he said, 'Celeste, if you agree to become this star,' he said, 'every night you will see Martha, and Martha will see you, and she'll be able to sing you songs and tell you stories.' And he said, 'Martha, if you accept, all the choirs of angels will join you in singing these songs to little Celeste.' Well, of course, both of them accepted immediately, and that's how a tiny little firefly got to be the Star of Bethlehem. Merry Christmas, and thank you very much.